Cool. Hello, everybody. Welcome to my talk, VQA, a new window into pixel pushing. So who's this ugly-looking guy right over here? That's me. My name is Wojciech Dziemianczyk. I'm a senior software engineer at the New York Times. That's my Twitter. If you want to spam me, please go ahead. Send me some pictures of cats if you want. So let's get into it. What is VQA? Well, QA or QC is you have QA engineers, quality assurance. So your QA engineers, they're making test cases, right? And they're testing for regressions. And it's a similar case with VQA, where you'll have product designers. They're basically ensuring that the design system is met. Whatever mock-ups that you're getting from that side, you know, they have to make sure that it conforms to the design system. So it's when you're doing this VQA process, the process I'll go into, but ensuring it, you're kind of comparing and contrasting between your source file and this, you know, what you see, what's output on your emulator or device. So it's kind of pixel pushing, and that's really, you know, what everybody calls it, but it's kind of more than that. And it has to be. It's maintaining some brand identity. And brand identity is super important when you work for a company like the New York Times, where every single day at 5 a.m. or 4 a.m., wherever the trucks go, they're pushing out this newspaper. And the newspaper has this logo at the top, and it has a whole bunch of fonts and line spacing. There's some articles that are packaged together, and they have a specific type of orientation, right? So there's a plethora of information that we have, which comes in a style guide. And this is kind of the source of truth when a product designer is shipping a new feature. You know, they need some sort of guidance. So we have a load of information. So this is one of the pages that we have, which tells you about Franklin, which is one of our typefaces. Gives you a short description, and then, you know, the different derivatives of that. And it also goes into line heights that you should be using. We have a typeface called Karnak that you shouldn't really be using in like body paragraphs. It's more so for titles. It also goes into logo use and colors, and don't touch the logos or mask colors on top of that logo. So when it's time for product to design these sort of features, they have to use a specific set of tooling. So these are your main three. Maybe Illustrator will be used, or I don't know. But mostly it's Photoshop. That's what, maybe 6 years ago, 5 years ago. I was in consulting. I worked at Touch Lab. Shout out to Kevin. That's what would be handed off to me, right? And I'd go through, I had experience with using Photoshop in previous years, so I'd take this Photoshop document and I'd go through it and try and convert this static image into something real on the device. So Photoshop is really used for like raster graphics. Roberto does some photography sitting in the front. So he's in there just pushing pixels and doing some Lightroom stuff. I don't know what you do. But then you also have things like Sketch and Figma, where Sketch and Figma, they're very similar, but they're used more towards graphical interfaces. So they don't have as many features as Photoshop does. That's fine, because you really, you know, you're not getting too crazy with Sketch and Figma, and, you know, you use vectors within them, and that's really all you need. So I have Photoshop and Sketch, and then I have this thing called Zeplin. So it's all about your source of truth. So with Photoshop, I said I was getting this Photoshop doc, and that's not good. And same with Sketch. You'd get the Sketch document. Maybe a product designer will convert that document into something a bit more consumable, like a redlines document that'll have some sort of, you know, distances between the left edge of the screen, right edge, how things relate, things like that. So Zeplin kind of does that for you. It takes this Photoshop or Sketch document and kind of converts it into something more consumable for a developer like myself. And Figma does that out of the box, right? So it's really about a single source of truth. I can't be, trying to see which Photoshop document is the latest and greatest. Maybe I choose the wrong one, then what? So it's super important that you have a single source of truth. But they still don't solve all of my problems, right? Because they're still dependencies. So what happens when I pick the wrong Photoshop document, right? Or that the content within the Photoshop document is just not correct. Same thing with Zeplin. Even though there's now an abstraction between what I'm consuming, there's still a dependency on the designer to push those changes. So if you're in consulting, it's more so a one-way conversation because it's really handoff. I'll have this iOS project, and it's kind of just like, hey, here, convert this to Android and make it do Android-y things. So what? So I'll implement this design, and then time will happen, right? I'm kind of finished, and it's time to hand it off to the client or review it eventually, and then you'll get feedback, and that feedback is like, this seems off, but like, what is off? We should make this bigger. Define bigger. And then the last one that you should dread is this version the latest? Which you should be crying at this point, because that usually means that either they didn't upload the right file or you downloaded the wrong one, and then everything's wrong. So that entire process kind of is a rough explanation of the motions that you get through VQA. So it's super tedious. I'm going back and forth, and that's never any fun. So UI also isn't super easy. For like parsing some JSON, I have some great libraries like Mashi or JSON that kind of do all the work for me. Or if I'm doing some sort of networking stuff, I have OKHTTP retrofit, right? If I'm doing Apollo, it generates all my classes for me based on the schema. But like, what is there for XML? It's really the designer taking this one frame in an animation, which is your interface, and handing that off to you. And then it's up to you to figure out how these things interact. Does this toolbar collapse? Does it not? Like trying to extract information, interrogate information from them. So an example of this tedious process is this super simple My Application app, which has Hello World in the center. You got Globe, which is at the bottom of Hello World. This is a constraint layout, and then Earth off of Globe. So this is in Sketch. And somehow this magically works in Figma, and you get the same output, which is great. But then I go and implement it within Android Studio, right? So you have, this is window active, which I'll get into in a bit. But you'll kind of see that the baselines don't really align, which is a problem. Because if my UI was this simple, then life would be easy, but it's not. If I go crazy and want to implement the entire interface, then it's time to VQA. Now I have to go through and see what is wrong. So in this case, Hello World is kind of right. The baselines kind of do align, but then as you go down, there are dependencies on views above it. And the reason is because in Figma and in Sketch, if you're looking at these views, it's only measuring the text, the label itself. But once I implement it, the bounds of the view within the view hierarchy in your app, it's the view bounds itself. It's not just the top or the bottom of this typeface, right? So everything's off, which is not good. So then I have to go into Photoshop or Sketch or Figma or talk to the designer and kind of have them take a screenshot, push some rulers around, and try and extract some distances for me, which it's just a rinse and repeat process. It's super tedious, and it's sort of not a waste of time because you have to do it, but it's some of the things that hopefully with the right tooling we can try and avoid. So how can I make that process more productive? Not only that, how can I kind of increase proactivity? If I'm the designer and I'm responsible for, or if I'm the developer and I'm responsible for this implementation, you know, if it's being handed off to me and it's kind of this one-way conversation, like it's up to me to make this perfect. So how can I basically do less work? I'm lazy. I don't want to do this stuff. I want to, you know, do some cool Kotlin stuff or something like that, whatever the kids are doing these days. So, so how can I improve that? Well, this is where a window comes in. So this is something that I released a couple months ago. And it was kind of a result of those conversations that I had with product and design of like, we'd get these tickets and they'd say like, let's make this image a little bit bigger, right? And would be great if you had a tool that a designer can use that kind of gives you these distances instead of you kind of trying to interrogate them for that information. So what does it do? Hopefully this video works. It does, yay. So basically, it's view layout bounds on steroids. So with view layout bounds, it doesn't give you positional information, but it kind of tells you your view hierarchy. And this does something similar, but more so, where you can now long press and kind of extract distances between two different elements, or just positional information within the decor view or the actual screen width and height. So it works the same way as Google Assistant, which is kind of weird, because my thing is kind of a hack around Google Assistant. So with Assistant, you have... is the video showing? Nope. This would show a bottom sheet, and the bottom sheet shows up, and Google Assistant has an affordance for a screenshot, and it says like, what's on this screen, right? Which is super important for how Window works. So how does it work? Well, you have this voice interaction service, which kind of spools up when you hit when you long press on the home button, and then you have this voice interaction session, right? And that session has some lifecycle methods. It has methods for returning a view, which in Google Assistant's case is the bottom sheet. In my case, it's just like a view that I draw on. And then it has these two methods that I'll show shortly. But those two methods return a bitmap and a view node, which I'll explain. So, like I said, you have a session that started, and that session is overlaid on top of whatever activity that you currently have visible on your screen. So I can create a view, and that view will be shown on top of whatever content I'm currently viewing. So on create content view is exactly that. You inflate your view, and then set content view is that inflated view, and you can do whatever you want with it. Set up a listener, adjust your detector, or what have you. Then you have some lifecycle methods. So this session could be active between multiple long presses of that home screen, or that home screen, the home button. So on show will be called when it's live, and then on hide will be called, and then I can kind of break down things that I need to. And then lastly, this is where all the magic happens. You have on-handle assist and on-handle screenshot. So that bitmap, that is the screenshot that the user is currently seeing when they long press the home button. On-handle assist has this thing called an assist structure. And that is basically a representation of the view hierarchy at that moment as well. So you combine those two things, and then you get the window app. So like I mentioned before, I'm drawing straight to the canvas, and it's on API 23. There are some methods that were added in the voice interaction session that only exist on that API level. There's Android Q support. Now that there's a role with Role Manager, there's an assistant role. So there's some cleaner onboarding there. And the most important thing is that no library is needed. That means you can have this tool in your tool set, and you won't have to remove it if you have prod or debug or anything like that. So how do we enable it? We have, that's okay. We click that red box that was up there. You click the Google app. you change to window, and then you make sure these two toggles are enabled. And those two toggles are what gives me the view hierarchy and the bitmap. So once you have that, you'll have some quality of life toggles to do some cool stuff. You can add grids, or you can add columns or rows with varying thicknesses. You can add rulers from the left, top, right, bottom, start, end, based on dips, or you can do percentages, and you can pick some cool colors, or solid, or dashed lines. And then you can toggle outlines. So in this case, we have the Hangouts app, and I didn't need to do anything in order for this to work. So I long press, I tap on the hamburger, and I get some distance information. Then I hit back, I'm greeted back to what I had previously seen. And then I single tap on the image, and maybe I want to check the distance between the toolbar and this image. And now I long press on the toolbar, and I get a distance of 148. So there's an example of columns with 2 rulers, 50% height and width, vertical and horizontal. So what does the future include for this tool? So I want to kind of fix and improve the interaction with rulers. If you can swipe from the left of the screen or right of the screen, maybe a ruler spawns. Or show like measurement, the actual measurement in dips at the top and left. I want to have a persistent notification so you can toggle in between Google Assistant and window itself, so that pain points alleviated. I want some custom groups if I want to make something with an ID of toolbar or rectangle or something like that. And I want that to kind of render as purple, then that's there. Improved touch interaction. I'm basically faking like a view click listener and how view clicks propagate down manually, so that still needs a little bit of work. And then some metadata around what you're currently seeing on screen. So maybe a view is enabled or disabled, kind of showing that. Maybe the full view hierarchy, so you can dig in to it manually. So what else? Well, this is the same Hangouts app, and then you got some funky blue outlines. Kind of looks similar to what you've seen, but not really. So you get rid of that UI, and then you have this, which is all XML. So the idea of the tool is, that's a great scrolling animation. So the idea of this tool is to kind of move work back to design. Like, as a developer, I don't want to be doing all this work, and I want to enable a product designer or a QA engineer the access or some sort of tooling, so that way they can take work off of me. And that's basically the reason why I wanted this to exist. So you can download Window at window.mypartofmylastname.com. And thank you. Cool. So if you have any questions, you can spam at me on Twitter, or just, harass me outside of this room, and I'll try and answer what you got. Thank you. Yeah.
Instead of the persistent notification, I wanted to actually make a settings inside window. I was thinking about actually making a PR to you.
Okay.
So I can start persistent instead of having the persistent notification, which is something I hate.